A billionaire father, who had everything money could buy but could not reach his own child, went through 17 maids in just 1 month, each one quitting or being fired because they could not handle his little girl's uncontrollable meltdowns. His 6-year-old daughter, living with severe autism and refusing to speak after losing her mother, pushed everyone away. The mansion became a place of constant turnover, frustration, and heartbreaking silence. Yet one day, after all the failed attempts, after all the tears and sleepless nights, something unexpected happened. The girl finally felt comfortable with someone, a quiet housekeeper who never forced her, never judged her, and simply stayed calm. And in that moment, the billionaire, who had conquered industries and built an empire, finally broke down in tears, not because of failure this time, but because of the first fragile sign of hope that his daughter might let someone back into her world. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. William Carter was known across the country as one of the wealthiest and most powerful men alive. He owned a pharmaceutical empire that supplied medicines to hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies in every major city. His name was constantly mentioned in business magazines, his face often appeared on television interviews, and his fortune was admired and envied by others. But despite all of that, William's life was falling apart inside the walls of his home. Ever since his wife had passed away unexpectedly, everything had changed. His 6-year-old daughter, Emily, had been diagnosed with severe autism, and the shock of losing her mother had made her retreat even further into silence. She had not spoken a single word since that day. William tried everything that his money could buy: private therapists, world-renowned specialists, advanced treatment centers, and countless programs that promised progress. Nothing worked. Every effort ended in failure, leaving him frustrated and hopeless. The mansion, which once had been filled with laughter, music, and warmth, now felt empty. The rooms were quiet, the hallways dark, and the air heavy with loneliness. William spent long, sleepless nights sitting alone, staring at old photographs, remembering better days, and realizing Emily no longer seemed to know him. At night, William would often sit in the living room with a glass of whiskey, not because he enjoyed drinking, but because it dulled the emptiness for a few minutes. On the large table in front of him, dozens of photographs lay scattered, showing his wife smiling, holding Emily as a baby, and family moments that once seemed permanent. He would trace his finger along the faces in the pictures, remembering the way things used to be, and asking himself how life had shifted so quickly from happiness to despair. Upstairs, Emily sat quietly in her room, surrounded by her toys, yet disconnected from them. She lined up her dolls or stared out the window for hours, giving no reaction when William tried to talk to her. He would kneel beside her, speak softly, and wait for any sign that she was listening, but there was no response. The silence was unbearable. He felt powerless, as though his own daughter was slipping away into a world he could not enter. No deal, no connection, no influence could bridge the distance between them. For all his wealth, William could not buy the one thing he desperately wanted: his child's voice, her trust, her recognition. The mansion became less a home and more a prison of silence. The mornings were not any better. William often woke early, not from rest, but from exhaustion. His bed was large and empty, a reminder of his wife's absence. He would dress in expensive suits, attend high-profile meetings, and pretend that everything was under control. His employees and partners saw him as confident and unstoppable, but inside, he was falling apart. After every meeting, after every fake smile, he returned home to the same reality: Emily sitting quietly, not looking at him, not acknowledging his presence. Therapists visited regularly, charging high fees for their sessions, but their techniques had no effect. They tried flashcards, sound exercises, and even music therapy, yet Emily remained silent. William watched helplessly, hoping for a word, a glance, or any sign of connection. Nothing came. When the therapist left, the silence of the house returned. The rooms echoed with emptiness, and William felt more alone than ever. The once vibrant home had become cold and unwelcoming, filled with shadows of what it used to be. He often found himself walking from room to room aimlessly, searching for traces of the life he had lost. Every step reminded him that no amount of money could change the situation. Evenings dragged on painfully. William tried reading books on autism, searching for answers, highlighting passages, and making notes late into the night. He wanted to understand Emily, to reach her somehow. He built a library of medical journals and parenting guides, all stacked high in his study. Still, the more he read, the more hopeless he felt. Each page reminded him that progress was uncertain and often slow. Sometimes he thought about the promises of experimental treatments abroad, but even those carried no guarantee. Emily continued to drift further away, and William feared he would lose her completely. The house's silence felt suffocating. He could hear the ticking of the clocks, the hum of machines, and his own heavy breathing as he stared at the family portraits on the walls. In one photo, his wife stood with Emily in her arms, both smiling at him as though life was perfect. That image haunted him most, reminding him that happiness had once been real. But now the laughter was gone, replaced with endless quiet. Each evening ended the same way. William sitting alone, his eyes red from exhaustion, waiting for something to change that never did. His staff tried to comfort him, but their efforts were useless. Maids moved quietly through the hallways, chefs prepared elaborate meals, but William barely ate. He pushed food around his plate, distracted by thoughts of Emily. The little girl barely touched her meals too, often retreating back to her room, where she arranged objects in repetitive patterns. The mansion's size, once a symbol of William's success, now amplified his loneliness. Every corner held memories of his wife and daughter together, memories that only deepened his grief. He sometimes avoided certain rooms altogether because the memories were too painful. In the garden, he remembered afternoons when his wife had played with Emily among the flowers. In the dining room, he remembered family dinners filled with laughter. Now those same spaces felt empty, stripped of life. William's world of wealth and power seemed meaningless. People outside saw him as untouchable, but inside, he was a broken man. His daughter's silence weighed heavier than any financial burden. No business failure, no competitor, no scandal could hurt him the way Emily's distance did. At the end of each day, William sat alone, haunted by the thought that he was losing the only family he had left. Nights were the hardest for William. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, it was shallow and filled with restless dreams. He often stayed awake, pacing the halls, checking on Emily, and staring at the closed door of his wife's old bedroom. Sometimes he would enter and sit on the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets as if she might suddenly return. The emptiness inside that room mirrored the emptiness in his heart. Then he would go back to his study, open the family albums, and let the photographs consume him. In those pictures, Emily's eyes sparkled with joy. Her laughter was captured forever, and his wife stood proudly beside them. Now, those same eyes looked distant, unfocused, and unreachable. William realized he was no longer a father in Emily's world. He had become a stranger to her, a figure who provided food and shelter, but no connection. That thought cut deeper than anything else. He had conquered industries, expanded his empire, and built a fortune that few could imagine, yet he failed at the one role that mattered most. As he sat there in silence, William knew money and power could not buy his way back into his daughter's world. Failure became a normal part of William's life. He had always been a man who solved problems quickly and efficiently, but inside his mansion, every day brought new difficulties. In just 1 month, he had already gone through 17 maids, each one unable to manage the challenges that came with caring for Emily. Some of them left in tears, overwhelmed by the constant screaming, the sudden outbursts, and the exhausting routine. Others were dismissed by William himself after he lost patience with their inability to handle the situation. The staff turnover became a running pattern, and the mansion, despite its wealth and luxury, began to feel like a place no one wanted to stay in. Emily's meltdowns were unpredictable and intense. She would scream for hours, throwing objects, covering her ears as if the world around her was unbearable. Sometimes she would press her head against the walls or the floor, and no one could calm her down. For William, watching these moments was unbearable. He had no way of reaching her, no method of stopping her pain, and it made him feel like he was failing as a father. The empire he ruled outside the mansion seemed worthless compared to this helplessness. The routines of the household became unstable, and William grew more desperate with each passing day. Meals were the hardest part of the day. Emily often refused to eat, no matter what was placed in front of her. The chefs tried everything, from simple meals to elaborate dishes, but nothing worked consistently. Sometimes she would only eat a small piece of bread, other times she would not touch food at all. The maids would try to encourage her, but Emily would push plates away, throw them to the floor, or scream until the staff gave up. William, who once handled million-dollar negotiations without hesitation, now found himself begging his daughter to eat just one spoonful of food. When she rejected him, it broke something inside of him. He felt powerless, stripped of control, and every attempt ended in failure. The stress of managing his company during the day and facing Emily's silence at night left him drained. The mansion, which once was filled with staff, slowly became emptier as fewer people were willing to work there. Word spread among employees that William Carter's house was not just difficult, but unbearable. Each time someone left, the walls of the mansion felt colder and lonelier. The violent meltdowns continued, sometimes triggered by the smallest things. A sound too loud, a sudden touch, or a change in routine could send Emily into hours of screaming. She would throw herself on the ground, hitting her head against the hard floor, while William or a maid tried to protect her from hurting herself. At first, William thought money could solve the problem. He hired specialists, therapists, and even personal nurses to stay inside the mansion. But one after another, they failed to make progress. Emily resisted them all, refusing to cooperate, and her meltdowns only worsened with strangers in the house. The therapists wrote reports full of explanations and medical terms, but none of it gave William what he truly needed: peace for his daughter. Sitting helplessly through these episodes crushed him. He would try to hold Emily, but she pushed him away violently, as if even his presence made things worse. Every rejection from her left him feeling more broken. He began to wonder if she even knew who he was anymore. He questioned whether he was truly her father in her eyes, or just another person in a world she didn't want. That uncertainty cut him deeper than anything else. William was not used to this kind of defeat. In the business world, he controlled every detail, planned every move, and always came out victorious. But with Emily, nothing worked. No amount of planning, money, or influence changed the outcome. Each time she screamed or turned away from him, it was a direct reminder that he was powerless where it mattered most. He started canceling meetings, arriving late to work, and ignoring important calls. His empire, once his pride, now seemed meaningless compared to the battles inside his home. His partners noticed his distraction, and his employees whispered about how their unstoppable boss was suddenly slipping. But William didn't care. His world was reduced to the walls of the mansion and the silence of his daughter. He spent hours in her room, sitting quietly, hoping she would look at him, speak to him, or show any sign of connection. But Emily remained locked in her own world, unreachable. That silence was louder to William than any criticism or scandal he had ever faced in business. It was the one challenge he could not overcome. It broke him in ways that nothing else had ever done. Each rejection from Emily felt like a wound that would not heal. William tried to tell himself that she was sick, that it was not her fault, but in his heart, he still felt the pain of being shut out. He longed for the smallest gesture, even a glance or a word, but it never came. Instead, she pushed him away, avoided his touch, or sat with her eyes distant, lost in a world he couldn't enter. He began to doubt his own strength. The powerful man who controlled an empire was reduced to tears in his own home. Sometimes, late at night, he broke down completely, burying his face in his hands, unable to stop the grief. The thought that Emily might never return to him filled him with fear. The mansion was filled with reminders of his failures. Rooms where therapists had come and gone, hallways where maids had cried, and the dining room where Emily refused to eat. Every corner carried a memory of defeat. William realized that he was fighting a battle that could not be won with money or strategy. It was a fight for connection, and it was slipping further from his reach. The weight of these failures crushed William day after day. He had fired maids in anger, shouted at therapists, and blamed himself endlessly. Nothing changed. Emily continued her meltdowns, continued her silence, and continued to reject him. The empire he had built, the billions he controlled, all meant nothing compared to the single word he wanted from his daughter. In his world of business, rejection was normal, but he always had another chance, another strategy. Here in his home, every rejection from Emily was final. It wasn't just painful, it was unbearable. It was proof that he was powerless, not only as a father but as a man. For someone who had always been seen as strong, it was the hardest truth he had ever faced. The world outside still saw William Carter as untouchable, but inside his mansion, he was broken. He was a father who had everything and yet had nothing. Sitting alone at night, listening to Emily's cries echo through the halls, William understood that all his victories in business could not save him from this one unending defeat. His daughter's silence was the only battle he could never win. Then came Grace Miller, a housekeeper who was different from all the others who had passed through William Carter's mansion. She did not arrive with big promises or special techniques. She was quiet, polite, and kept her head down. Grace did not try to involve herself in William's personal matters, nor did she ask questions about the tragic atmosphere that surrounded the house. Her only focus was on her job, dusting the shelves, sweeping the floors, and keeping things in order. William barely noticed her at first because she blended into the background in a way the others never had. The staff who came before her had often tried to offer advice about Emily or showed fear when confronted with the girl's meltdowns. Grace was different. She did not try to give opinions or interfere. She seemed invisible, and yet her presence was steady and dependable. What William did not notice right away was that Emily had begun to notice Grace. From behind heavy curtains or from the corner of a hallway, Emily would stand with her toy stethoscope in hand, watching the new housekeeper as she quietly moved from room to room. Grace did not react to Emily's staring. She did not try to force interaction, nor did she rush to speak or make the child come closer. Instead, she continued her work as though nothing unusual was happening. When she finished cleaning a room, she would sometimes leave a warm glass of milk on a nearby table, never pushing it toward Emily, but placing it within reach. Grace would hum softly to herself while working, not loud enough to be intrusive, but enough to create a calm background sound that filled the silence of the house. For a girl so used to chaos, sudden noises, and failed attempts at connection, this small act of consistency was different. Emily began to watch more closely. Some days she would remain hidden, simply observing Grace. Other days she would inch closer, curious but cautious. The milk sometimes stayed untouched until it went cold, but other times Emily picked it up and drank quietly when no one was looking. Grace never made it an event. She never clapped or praised. She just continued humming, wiping surfaces, and allowing Emily to decide. Day after day, this silent routine continued. William noticed small changes, but did not interfere, afraid that if he did, the progress would vanish. Grace's calm presence seemed to bring something new to the mansion, something different from the pressure of therapists or the strict routines that always ended in frustration. Emily began to appear more often, no longer hiding for hours in her room. She followed Grace's movements with her eyes, her toy stethoscope always in her hand, as if it gave her courage. Grace, true to her nature, did not try to take it away or use it as a tool to engage. She allowed Emily to keep it, understanding without words that it was important. The more Grace stayed the same, calm, quiet, predictable, the more Emily seemed willing to accept her presence. Sometimes she would even sit in the same room, drinking the milk in silence, while Grace cleaned nearby. William was astonished. For years, professionals had tried countless methods to get through to Emily, but here was a housekeeper doing nothing extraordinary, yet creating a space where Emily no longer seemed afraid. Grace never claimed to be a miracle worker, and she never discussed what she was doing. She only showed up each day, put on her uniform, and worked with the same patience she always carried. But William began to see that something was happening, something subtle yet powerful. Emily no longer screamed when Grace entered a room. She no longer ran away to hide when she heard footsteps. Instead, she stayed, even if it was only in the corner, quietly watching. Grace's choice to hum simple tunes while cleaning created a rhythm that Emily could anticipate. It was not therapy, not a treatment plan, but it was safe and consistent. That was what Emily responded to. William, who had spent millions on specialists, felt both confused and amazed that this woman with no training could do what none of them had achieved. He tried not to let his hope grow too fast, but every day he saw small signs that Emily was changing. It was not words or hugs, but it was something. For the first time in years, the silence in the house did not feel so heavy. It felt like a space where something new could happen. Emily began testing her courage in small ways. One day, she touched the glass of milk while Grace was still in the room, something she had never done before. Another day, she sat on the edge of a chair instead of hiding behind curtains. These little steps were almost invisible to anyone who did not understand her world, but to William, they were miracles. Grace, however, never reacted with surprise. She simply allowed Emily to act without pressure. She would continue humming or dusting as though it was perfectly normal for the child to sit quietly nearby. This lack of reaction was exactly what Emily needed. For once, there was no expectation, no demand, and no disappointment. Grace gave her the freedom to exist without fear. Slowly, Emily's meltdowns became less frequent in Grace's presence. The girl still had moments of screaming or withdrawing, but around the housekeeper, they were shorter and less intense. William noticed Emily's eyes followed Grace in a way they never followed him. And while it hurt, it also gave him hope. He began to see that Grace had stepped into a role no one else had been able to fill. Without realizing it, Grace Miller became the first person Emily allowed near her fragile world. She had not forced her way in, and she had not used complicated strategies. She had simply been there, steady, calm, and patient. William, who had once believed money could solve anything, now understood that this quiet housekeeper had done what specialists, nurses, and therapists could not. Grace's presence had opened a door, even if only a small one. Emily was still silent, still distant, but she was no longer completely unreachable. The toy stethoscope remained in her hands, a constant companion, but now she carried it into rooms where Grace was working. She sat closer, sometimes sipping the milk while watching her, sometimes just staying in the same space without fear. For William, it was the first true progress he had seen in years. The mansion, though still quiet, no longer felt like an empty shell. It felt like the beginning of something fragile but real, and all of it started because Grace Miller, without effort or expectation, created space where no one else had succeeded. The breakthrough came on a night that seemed like any other. Grace had finished her chores early and decided to rest for a few minutes on the rug in the living room. She sat quietly, her back against the sofa, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She did not notice Emily at first, but the little girl was nearby, holding her toy stethoscope, as she often did. For weeks, Emily had been watching Grace closely, slowly allowing herself to be near her without fear. This time was different. Emily walked forward, her small steps cautious but steady. She stopped in front of Grace, looked down at her for a moment, and then lifted the stethoscope. Grace remained still, not wanting to startle her. Emily leaned forward and gently pressed the toy against Grace's chest. Then, in the softest whisper, she spoke words no one expected. "I will heal you, Mommy." Grace froze. The sound of Emily's voice filled the silent room. It was the first time Emily had spoken in years. Tears welled up in Grace's eyes as she realized what had just happened. She wanted to respond, but she was too overwhelmed. Emily had broken her silence at last. Grace did not know how to move or what to say. Her entire body trembled with shock, and her eyes blurred as tears slid down her cheeks. She stared at Emily, unable to believe she had just heard the girl's voice for the first time. It was fragile, almost broken from years of silence, but it was real. The toy stethoscope still pressed against her chest as Emily's hand held it firmly, her expression serious and focused. Grace understood in that instant that Emily had not spoken randomly. The word "mommy" revealed the deep wound that lived inside her heart, the longing for the mother she had lost. Grace felt the weight of that moment, realizing Emily had chosen her as the figure to receive those words. She could not replace the woman who had died, but somehow, without meaning to, she had entered a space in Emily's world where no one else had been allowed. Grace sat frozen, terrified that any sudden movement might push Emily away or end the miracle that had just happened. At that exact moment, William entered the room. He had been coming down the hallway when he heard something he thought was impossible, the sound of his daughter's voice. His heart raced and he rushed inside, only to find Emily kneeling before Grace, speaking her first words in years. The sight struck him like a blow. His daughter, who had never responded to him, never spoken despite endless attempts, was talking, but not to him. William stood there in silence, torn between joy and pain. Relief filled him because Emily had finally broken her silence, but jealousy and sadness cut deep because it had not been with him. He saw the toy stethoscope pressed against Grace's chest, saw the way Emily looked at her, and felt as if he had been replaced. William had poured everything into reaching Emily, money, effort, sleepless nights. Yet Grace, a housekeeper, had done it without even trying. His emotions collided violently inside him, leaving him unable to react. He simply stood, frozen, as the moment unfolded before his eyes. Emily did not notice her father's presence right away. Her attention stayed on Grace, her face calm but filled with something new: connection. Grace, still overwhelmed, tried to keep her breathing steady as she looked into the little girl's eyes. She wanted to reach out, to hold her, but feared it might be too much too soon. William's presence loomed in the doorway, his expression tight, his jaw clenched as he processed what he was seeing. For years, he had imagined the first word Emily would say to him, how it would feel, how he would embrace her in tears. Instead, here she was, whispering to another woman, calling her mommy. His heart ached, but he also could not deny the miracle unfolding. For the first time in years, his daughter was speaking, even if the words were not meant for him. The mansion that had been silent for so long now echoed with Emily's fragile voice, and that sound alone was priceless. William wanted to step forward, but fear held him back. He was terrified of ruining what had just been achieved. Grace's own emotions grew stronger by the second. She never expected to become such an important figure in Emily's fragile world. She had only come to clean, to provide a service quietly. Yet somehow, through patience and calm presence, she had built trust where others had failed. Now, hearing Emily's words, she understood the responsibility placed on her shoulders. She could feel William's eyes burning with mixed emotions from across the room, but she kept her focus on the child before her. Emily slowly lowered the stethoscope and sat quietly, her body tense, as if waiting for something. Grace wanted to tell her how proud she was, but she sensed silence was the safest choice. Emily had offered a gift, and it had to be protected carefully. Grace gave a small nod, showing acceptance without pressure. William watched helplessly, wanting to join, but realizing he was an outsider in that moment. He was filled with gratitude for Grace, yet also bitterness that his daughter had turned to her instead of him. The conflicting emotions twisted inside him until he could hardly breathe. The reality of what had just happened sank into the three of them. For Grace, it was awe. For Emily, it was a fragile attempt to reconnect with the world. For William, it was a storm of jealousy, relief, and heartbreak. He could not ignore the fact that Grace had done, without intention, what years of specialists and millions of dollars could not accomplish. His daughter had spoken. She had chosen someone else, but she had spoken. The silence that had haunted the mansion for years was broken in that single moment. William stood frozen, trying to hold back the storm of feelings tearing through him. Emily finally turned her head and noticed her father in the doorway. Her eyes lingered on him only briefly before dropping back to her lap, and the silence returned. For William, the pain of being left out was sharp, but even in that pain he could not deny the truth. Everything he had failed to achieve with doctors, Grace had done without even trying. The breakthrough had come, and it had changed everything forever. Distraught and unable to understand how Grace had achieved what he could not, William began to dig into her past. At first it was simple curiosity, but soon it became an obsession. He asked his assistants to run background checks and demanded every detail they could uncover. What he found shocked him. Buried in court records and newspaper archives were pieces of a scandal that painted Grace in a troubling light. Years ago, she had been a pediatric nurse, someone trusted to care for children. But reports accused her of negligence during a critical moment, and the accusations had destroyed her career. The case ended with her losing custody of her own child. The words in the documents jumped out at William like knives: negligence, unfit, custody revoked. Suddenly, the calm woman who had earned Emily's fragile trust appeared dangerous in his eyes. He could not ignore what he had read. He replayed in his mind Emily pressing the stethoscope against Grace's chest, calling her mommy, and though it had been a breakthrough, fear now mixed with his gratitude. Could Grace be hiding something? Could she be a risk to his daughter? These thoughts consumed him, pushing him closer to a painful decision. To confirm what he had found, William turned to his most trusted advisor, Veronica Hale. Veronica had been with him through business crises, lawsuits, and personal struggles, and he valued her opinion more than anyone's. When he presented her with the documents about Grace, Veronica did not hesitate. She confirmed the worst, telling William that keeping Grace in the house was reckless and dangerous. She spoke with certainty, reminding him of his responsibility as a father and warning that allowing Grace to stay could lead to disaster. Veronica's voice was sharp and firm, cutting through his hesitation. She insisted that Grace's past could not be ignored, no matter how much progress Emily had made. William listened, torn between two realities. On one side, Grace had been the first person to reach Emily, creating a fragile connection that no one else had achieved. On the other, her past mistakes cast a shadow of doubt and fear. The decision weighed heavily on him, but Veronica's words echoed in his mind, convincing him that he had no choice but to protect Emily at all costs, even if it meant breaking her heart. The choice did not come easily, but William finally decided to let Grace go. He told her one morning, his voice flat and controlled, though inside he was breaking apart. Grace did not argue. She listened quietly, nodded once, and began to pack her belongings without protest. There was no plea, no explanation, no attempt to defend herself. She moved through the mansion calmly, folding her clothes, gathering her few possessions, and preparing to leave. William watched her from a distance, his chest tightening with guilt. He wanted to stop her, to take back his words, but he told himself it was for Emily's safety. Grace placed her bag by the door, gave one last glance toward the staircase where Emily often stood watching, and then walked out of the mansion without another word. The silence she left behind was heavier than ever. William stood frozen in the empty hallway, knowing he had removed the one person who had brought light into his daughter's world. He tried to convince himself it was the right decision, but deep down, he already felt the first sting of regret. The house that had briefly felt alive returned to its old, cold silence. The consequences of that decision appeared almost immediately. Emily noticed Grace's absence and reacted with a level of distress William had never seen before. She screamed for hours, her small voice breaking as she called out, "Mommy!" again and again. Her cries echoed through the mansion, louder and more painful than the silence that had haunted it before. She refused food, pushing plates away, throwing them to the ground, and screaming until her throat went raw. Nothing could comfort her. William tried to hold her, begged her to eat, and even called in doctors, but nothing worked. Emily banged her head against the walls in frustration, leaving marks that terrified him. The girl who had taken her first step toward connection had now collapsed into deeper despair. Grace's absence tore through her fragile world, and the progress she had made disappeared in a matter of days. William realized too late that Grace had not been just another housekeeper. She had been the anchor Emily had desperately needed. Without her, Emily unraveled completely, and William stood powerless once more, watching his daughter suffer. William's guilt grew unbearable as he saw Emily falling apart. He replayed the decision in his mind again and again, questioning whether he had been blinded by fear. He remembered Grace's quiet patience, the way she never forced Emily, and the miracle of hearing his daughter's voice for the first time. None of that could be erased by the documents or the warnings from Veronica. Emily's screams shook him to his core, each "mommy" piercing him like a knife. He tried calling Grace, but the number she had left was no longer active. She had vanished from his life as quietly as she had entered it. William realized he had not even given her the chance to explain, to share her side of the story. Instead, he had judged her on the past, ignoring what she had proven in the present. Watching Emily reject food and injure herself out of despair, he finally understood the cost of his decision. Money and power could not undo it. For the first time, William admitted to himself that he had made a terrible mistake. The empire he built could not save him from the damage he had caused. As days passed, the situation only worsened. Emily grew weaker from refusing food, and the doctors warned William that her health was at serious risk. Still, she cried out for Grace, calling her "mommy" in broken, desperate tones. The mansion had become unbearable, filled with the sound of suffering that William could not silence. Veronica tried to reassure him that he had done the right thing, but her words felt empty now. He could see with his own eyes that Emily's collapse was a direct result of his choice. William sat by his daughter's bedside at night, holding her small hand while she tossed in restless sleep, her body thin and her face pale. He whispered promises that he would fix everything, but he knew those promises were empty unless Grace returned. The realization struck him harder than any business failure or personal loss. He had taken away the only person who had given Emily hope. Now his daughter was slipping further into despair, and it was his fault. With every scream, every refusal of food, every cry of "mommy," William's heart broke more. He understood fully, without denial, that he had made a terrible mistake. Before leaving the mansion, Grace had gone into William's study to collect a few cleaning supplies she often stored there. She had no intention of snooping, but when she opened one of the bottom drawers, she noticed a stack of papers carelessly shoved inside. Something about the way they were hidden caught her attention. She hesitated, knowing she should probably close the drawer and walk away, but her curiosity overcame her. She pulled the stack out and began to flip through the documents. What she found made her heart pound. The files were medical reports about Emily, and they looked older than the recent paperwork William often left on his desk. Grace sat down in the chair, spreading the pages out carefully. Her eyes landed on a report that shocked her. Emily's original diagnosis had not been severe autism, as everyone had been told. Instead, the first specialist to evaluate her had written sensory processing disorder in clear letters across the top of the page. Grace read it 3 times, hardly believing what she saw. The report explained in detail how Emily's brain struggled to handle sounds, textures, and lights, which matched everything Grace had witnessed firsthand. This information had been hidden. Grace kept reading, her hands trembling. At the bottom of the page, the diagnosis was signed by Dr. Joseph Lang, a respected specialist she recognized by name. What unsettled her more was the evidence that followed. Notes attached to the file showed that this report had never been shared with therapists who later worked with Emily. Instead, it had been forwarded directly to Veronica Hale, William's trusted advisor. Grace stared at the papers in disbelief, realizing this was not a mistake. It was deliberate. Someone had chosen to bury this diagnosis, pushing Emily into the wrong category of treatment. Severe autism required a completely different approach, and forcing Emily through years of ineffective therapies had only made her condition worse. The weight of that truth crushed Grace's chest. All of Emily's suffering, all of William's despair, had not been inevitable. They had been living under false information because someone wanted it that way. Grace folded the report back into its folder, but she could not erase what she had read. For the first time, she understood that the root of Emily's pain was not just circumstance, it was negligence. She left the study, shaken, clutching copies she quickly made of the documents before returning the originals to the drawer. That night, while the mansion was quiet, she sat in her small rented apartment going over the papers again and again. The details lined up perfectly with what she had observed in Emily's behavior. Her violent meltdowns often came after loud noises, bright lights, or uncomfortable clothing textures. Grace remembered how humming softly had calmed her, how predictability made her feel safe. These were all signs of sensory processing struggles, not autism. Grace felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. For years, Emily had been trapped inside treatments that were never designed for her real condition. Specialists had tried speech drills, strict schedules, and forced interactions, none of which matched what she truly needed. Grace imagined how much progress Emily could have made if her correct diagnosis had been respected. The thought of it filled her with grief. But alongside the grief came determination. She knew this truth could no longer stay hidden. Someone had taken Emily's voice away, not just by negligence, but by burying the one report that could have changed everything. Grace's first step was to bring the report to Emily's current therapist. She waited nervously outside the office, the folder pressed against her chest as if it were made of glass. When she finally met with the therapist, she explained how she had found the file and handed it over. The therapist studied it carefully, flipping through the pages, eyes widening with every paragraph. After a long silence, he admitted that the report explained Emily's symptoms far more accurately than her official record did. He said that if he had seen this information from the start, his entire approach would have been different. Grace's suspicions were confirmed. Emily had been misdiagnosed and, as a result, mistreated for years. The therapist's words hit her hard. This changes everything. Grace felt a strange mix of relief and rage. She was relieved to know she had not been imagining Emily's needs, but furious that so much suffering had been preventable. Leaving the office, she knew she had stepped into dangerous territory. This was no longer about being a housekeeper or a temporary caretaker. This was about exposing the truth and standing up for Emily, even if it meant crossing powerful people. Walking home that day, Grace thought about William and Veronica. She pictured William's haunted face, the guilt he carried every day, and realized he had been manipulated just as much as Emily had. Veronica, however, was another story. The fact that the original report had gone directly to her meant she had known the truth and chosen to suppress it. Grace could not understand why. Was it about control? Money? Influence? The reasons hardly mattered when the result had been Emily's suffering. Grace felt a fire grow inside her. She had stumbled into this family's life by accident, taking a housekeeping job to survive, but now she was at the center of something far bigger. Emily's fragile breakthrough with her voice had shown Grace how much potential there was. If the right care and approach had been given, Emily might never have been trapped in silence for so long. Grace realized she could not simply walk away with this knowledge. To stay quiet would be to allow the harm to continue. And for the first time since losing her own child, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Grace decided she could no longer remain silent. She gathered the copies of the medical report, organized them with her notes and observations, and began planning her next move. She knew the risk. Veronica was powerful, and William was torn between fear and trust. Exposing the truth could put Grace in danger, could destroy the fragile place she had earned in Emily's life. But the decision was clear. Emily deserved to be seen for who she truly was, not forced into a false diagnosis that left her suffering. Grace thought of the moment Emily whispered, "I will heal you, Mommy," and felt her resolve harden. Those words had been more than a child's imitation. They had been a cry for help. Grace would not fail her. No matter what it cost, no matter what fight she had to face, she was determined to fight for Emily's truth. The files in her hands were not just papers. They were the key to giving Emily the life she deserved. With steady resolve, Grace prepared herself for what lay ahead. She would fight for Emily's truth, no matter the risk. William and Grace finally made the decision to reach out to Dr. Joseph Lang, the doctor who had signed Emily's original diagnosis years earlier. After everything Grace had uncovered, they knew he was the only one who could confirm the truth. William used his connections to contact Dr. Lang privately, arranging a meeting far from the eyes of Veronica or anyone else who might interfere. When the doctor agreed, relief mixed with tension. They planned the trip carefully, packing snacks, Emily's toys, and other things to keep her calm during the long drive. For William, it felt strange to be leaving his empire behind, not for a business trip or a negotiation, but for something that mattered more than all of it, his daughter's future. Grace, quiet but firm, prepared Emily's bag herself. She included the toy stethoscope Emily always carried, knowing it gave her comfort. On the morning they left, William drove, while Grace sat beside Emily in the back seat, keeping a close watch. The silence of the car was heavy, but for once it was not filled with despair. It was filled with determination. They were taking the first step toward uncovering the truth, and neither of them knew what to expect. The drive was long, and William felt his nerves tighten with every passing mile. He tried to focus on the road, but his mind drifted to all the years wasted on treatments that had brought no progress. Grace sat behind him, keeping Emily occupied as best as she could. At one point, they stopped at a rest area to stretch their legs and let Emily walk around. At first, things seemed fine, but suddenly Emily froze, overwhelmed by the crowd, the chatter of strangers, and the sound of engines running nearby. She covered her ears, dropped to the ground, and began screaming, her voice sharp with panic. Other travelers stared, some whispering, others looking away uncomfortably. William felt the familiar wave of helplessness rising in his chest. He had seen this countless times before, and it always ended with exhaustion and failure. But before he could react, Grace crouched down next to Emily. She didn't raise her voice, didn't try to pull her up, didn't panic. Instead, she hummed softly, the same calm tune she always used at the mansion. Slowly, Emily's screams softened. Her body stopped thrashing, and she pressed her face against Grace's shoulder. Within minutes, the meltdown passed. William stood frozen, astonished. What amazed him most was not that Emily calmed down. It was how she did it. No therapist, no nurse, no expensive program had ever been able to settle her meltdowns so quickly. They had all tried with strict instructions, firm tones, or forced routines, but none had worked. Grace, without training or theories, had managed it with nothing more than patience and calm presence. William felt something shift inside him. For years he had doubted her, even let her go once because of her past. Yet here she was, proving again that she understood Emily better than anyone else. Other parents at the rest stop looked on, surprised at the transformation, and William wished they knew just how miraculous it was. Emily, still holding on to Grace, looked calmer now, breathing evenly. Grace stayed close, humming until she was sure the worst had passed. William finally knelt beside them, his hand trembling as he placed it gently on Emily's back. For the first time in years, he felt hope flicker inside him. Grace had done what no expert could, and he silently admitted that without her, he would still be lost. Together, they returned to the car and continued the journey. When they arrived at Dr. Lang's office, William's heart raced. The building was modest, nothing like the grand hospitals he had visited before. It was quiet, almost unassuming, but William sensed it held the answers they had been searching for. Inside, Dr. Lang greeted them warmly, his presence calm and reassuring. He remembered Emily's case and seemed genuinely concerned as William explained what had happened over the years. Grace handed him the hidden report she had found, along with her notes. Dr. Lang read carefully, nodding as he reviewed the information. Then he turned to observe Emily, who sat clutching her toy stethoscope, avoiding eye contact, but visibly calmer than she usually was with strangers. He asked questions, spoke gently, and even tested her responses to small sounds and textures. His evaluation was thorough, and unlike the rushed clinical sessions William had witnessed before, Dr. Lang took his time. Every detail was considered, every reaction noted. When he finally set his papers aside, the weight of his words made William's chest tighten. Dr. Lang confirmed what Grace had discovered. Emily did not suffer from classic autism. Her condition was something entirely different. Dr. Lang explained it clearly, without the complicated language other doctors used. Emily's brain was not disconnected from reality. It was overwhelmed by it. She experienced the world too intensely. Every sound, every light, every touch reached her in a way that her brain could not filter. This was sensory processing disorder, not autism. He described how forcing Emily into strict autism programs had only worsened her struggles. What she needed was a controlled, safe environment where her senses could be managed and understood. Grace listened closely, nodding as though she had known all along. William sat in silence, his hands gripping his knees, his face pale. The truth was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because years had been wasted chasing the wrong treatments, causing Emily pain that could have been avoided. Liberating because now, finally, they had the right answer. Dr. Lang assured them that with proper support, Emily could thrive. She would face challenges, yes, but she was not unreachable. For William, the words hit like a storm. Everything he had believed about his daughter's condition had been wrong. Yet for the first time in years, he saw a real path forward. William felt shattered by the truth. He thought of every night spent begging for answers, every failed therapy, every moment when Emily's silence crushed him. All of it had been built on a false foundation. Anger burned inside him, anger at Veronica for hiding the report, anger at himself for trusting blindly, and anger at the system that had failed his daughter. But alongside the anger came something he had nearly forgotten: hope. Emily was not lost. She had a chance to live in a world that could make sense for her, if only he built it right. Grace sat beside him, her presence steady, as if reminding him that he was not alone in this fight. Emily, unaware of the weight of the conversation, sat humming softly to herself with the toy stethoscope in her hands. For William, that small sound no longer felt painful. It felt like the beginning of something new. He looked at Grace, and then at Dr. Lang, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that the future could change. After everything, after years of wasted effort, William finally felt hope return. Veronica struck back with precision. Within days of William meeting with Dr. Damaging stories about Grace appeared everywhere. News outlets began replaying grainy footage from her custody battle years earlier. Clips showed her in court, looking exhausted, her voice breaking under questioning. The media twisted the narrative, painting her as unstable, reckless, and unfit to care for any child. Headlines screamed across screens and newspapers, "Former nurse puts child at risk," "Unstable woman back in rich family's mansion," and "Grace Miller's troubled past resurfaces." Every channel carried the same story, and every detail was exaggerated to fit the picture Veronica wanted. William watched the reports in disbelief, anger rising as he recognized how carefully it had been planned. Grace, who had done nothing but show patience and care for Emily, was being destroyed in public. The smear campaign was effective. Parents in the community whispered, staff members in the mansion looked uneasy, and even business partners asked William if he was endangering his daughter by letting Grace remain close. The storm of lies spread so quickly that soon government agencies became involved. Child Protective Services, under pressure from the headlines, intervened with official orders. Grace had to leave the Carter mansion immediately. The removal was brutal. Officials arrived at the mansion without warning, armed with paperwork and authority. Grace did not resist. She simply packed her small bag and followed the agents quietly. But Emily's reaction was explosive. The moment she realized Grace was being taken away, she began to scream uncontrollably. She clawed at the doors, banging her fists against the wood until her skin turned red. She cried out, "Mommy!" again and again, her voice raw with desperation. When Grace tried to calm her one last time, officials pulled her away, warning her not to interfere. William stood frozen, his chest tightening as he watched his daughter crumble before his eyes. The mansion filled with Emily's screams, louder than anything William had ever heard from her before. She refused food, pushed away anyone who tried to comfort her, and locked herself in her room, sobbing until she had no strength left. For days, she would not eat or sleep properly. Her cries of "Mommy" echoed through the halls, tearing William apart. He realized with undeniable clarity that Grace was not the danger. The true danger was losing her. Grace had become Emily's lifeline, the only person who had reached her fragile world. William's grief quickly hardened into determination. He had been manipulated before, but this time he saw the game clearly. Veronica had built the smear campaign with precision, feeding the press with carefully chosen footage and exaggerated reports. But William knew the truth. He remembered the night Emily first spoke, the way Grace calmed her during the meltdown at the rest stop, and the progress that came only when Grace was near. No headline could erase those moments. Fueled by anger and guilt, William launched his own investigation. He used his power and resources not to protect his empire, but to uncover what Veronica had been hiding. Private investigators dug into medical files, financial records, and personal testimonies. What they discovered was bigger than even William had imagined. Families who had once trusted Veronica began stepping forward. They revealed stories of how she had silenced them, altered their children's diagnoses, and pushed them into expensive, unnecessary treatments that benefited her financially. William listened to these testimonies, each one more damning than the last. Veronica had not only sabotaged Grace, but she had built an empire of deceit. The web of lies stretched far beyond his family, and it was finally beginning to unravel. As the investigation deepened, the pattern became clear. Veronica had used her influence to manipulate parents, doctors, and clinics. Families reported how she had pressured them into agreeing with false diagnoses, promising access to special programs and treatments that never helped their children. Records showed how money flowed through her network, with profits tied directly to therapies that were unnecessary or harmful. In some cases, she had even threatened parents into silence, warning them that speaking out would cost them custody of their children. Grace's case was not unique. It was one of many. William sat in his office, surrounded by piles of evidence, each file confirming the scale of Veronica's corruption. The same advisor he had trusted for years, the woman he had relied on to protect his family, had orchestrated a system that profited from children's suffering. The truth was both horrifying and liberating. Horrifying because he saw how long he had been blind. Liberating because now he had proof. Grace had been right all along. Emily's pain was never her fault. It was the product of a web of lies spun by Veronica. William felt his anger sharpen into resolve. He would expose her. While William gathered evidence, Grace remained in the shadows, unable to return to the mansion, but determined to stay involved. She stayed in touch with William quietly, providing her insights about Emily's behavior and helping him piece together patterns in the medical records. She encouraged families to speak publicly, offering them the same calm support she had given Emily. Her reputation in the media remained tarnished, but in private, she was becoming the key to unlocking the truth. Meanwhile, Emily continued to deteriorate without her. She starved herself, scratched at her skin, and screamed until her voice cracked. Therapists brought in by William were useless. They could not calm her or even approach her. William spent sleepless nights by her side, trying to comfort her, but failing every time. Every cry of "Mommy" made his guilt heavier. He had once believed Veronica's lies, had once doubted Grace, and now his daughter was paying the price. Holding Emily in his arms as she sobbed, William swore to himself that he would not fail her again. Grace would be brought back, and Veronica's empire of deceit would collapse. The turning point came when families who had once feared Veronica finally gathered the courage to share their stories publicly. Supported by William's resources, they testified about how diagnoses had been changed, how records had been altered, and how money had dictated medical decisions. News outlets that once screamed against Grace now began reporting on Veronica's corruption. The narrative shifted, and the lies started falling apart. William appeared before cameras, not as the untouchable businessman, but as a father who admitted his mistakes and demanded justice for his daughter and for all the children who had been harmed. His words carried weight, and the world began to listen. Emily's cries for "Mommy" still echoed through the mansion, a painful reminder of the time lost. But William now knew the path forward. Grace was not the danger, she was the lifeline. With the truth finally surfacing, the web of lies Veronica had built was unraveling piece by piece. What had started as a smear campaign was now turning into a battle for justice, one that William was determined to win for Emily, for Grace, and for every family who had been silenced. The courtroom became the battleground that everyone had been waiting for. The air was heavy with tension as lawyers shuffled their papers, reporters filled the benches, and families who had once suffered under Veronica's schemes sat nervously in the audience. On one side sat Veronica Hale, polished as always, her expensive suit and carefully chosen words trying to project confidence. On the other side were William and Grace, with Emily absent due to her fragile condition, but present in spirit through every word spoken. Witnesses began to take the stand one by one. Parents told stories of how their children had been given false diagnoses, how they had been pressured into treatments that drained their savings while bringing no progress. Doctors admitted under oath that files had been altered, that Veronica had interfered directly in medical decisions, and that families who questioned her were silenced. The evidence piled higher with each testimony. The once respected advisor's carefully built reputation crumbled in front of the court. William sat quietly, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he listened to accounts that mirrored what had been done to Emily. Every detail confirmed the truth he had feared all along. Veronica's empire was built on lies. As the trial continued, the turning point came with a piece of evidence no one could deny. A recording was played before the judge and the jury, a direct conversation where Veronica threatened Grace. Her voice was sharp, cruel, and full of arrogance as she warned Grace to stay silent or face ruin. The courtroom fell into silence as the words echoed, undeniable proof of her intimidation tactics. Grace sat frozen as the recording played, tears welling in her eyes as she remembered the fear she had carried alone for so long. William's face hardened as he stared across the room at Veronica, no longer the advisor he once trusted, but the enemy who had nearly destroyed his daughter's life. The judge listened carefully, his expression stern, while the jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The defense tried to argue that the recording was taken out of context, but the damage was done. Veronica's mask had slipped, and the courtroom had seen her for who she truly was. Grace, for the first time, felt the weight of vindication. She was no longer the accused. She was the victim of a system designed to silence her, and now the truth was undeniable. Then came William's testimony, a moment that silenced the courtroom completely. He walked to the stand with measured steps, but his face revealed the pain of years of failure and guilt. When he began to speak, his voice was steady, but filled with emotion. He told the court how his daughter had been labeled as hopeless, treated like a lost cause, and forced through treatments that only made her worse. He explained how Veronica had stood beside him through it all, presenting herself as his trusted advisor, while secretly burying the report that could have changed everything. His words cut deep, not only because of his wealth and status, but because they came from a father who had suffered and watched his child suffer. "My daughter was treated like a lost cause for profit," he declared, his voice breaking slightly. Gasps filled the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every word. William's testimony was not about business or power. It was about love, betrayal, and the fight to save his child. In that moment, even the jury seemed to feel the weight of what had been done. William's truth shattered any defense Veronica had left. After days of testimony, evidence, and emotional accounts, the judge finally delivered his ruling. The courtroom fell into a hush as the words were read aloud. Veronica Hale was found guilty of fraud, misconduct, and manipulation of medical records. Her empire of lies had been exposed, and she would face the consequences of her actions. Families in the audience wept, some in relief, others in anger that justice had taken so long. Grace was cleared completely of all accusations. The judge stated plainly that she had acted only with care and compassion, and that the smear campaign against her had been nothing more than a tool to cover up Veronica's crimes. Grace closed her eyes as the words washed over her, tears falling silently down her face. William reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly, knowing that without her courage, none of this would have come to light. Veronica sat stiffly, her face pale, her future destroyed. The courtroom, once filled with fear and tension, now carried a sense of closure. The truth had won. Emily's suffering had not been in vain. For William and Grace, the ruling was not only justice, it was the start of healing. That evening, Grace returned to the Carter mansion, her steps hesitant as she approached the familiar door. William had driven her there personally, both of them silent during the ride, the weight of the day still sinking in. The mansion was quiet, but inside, Emily was waiting. She had grown thinner, her cheeks pale, her eyes exhausted from days of crying and refusing to eat. The moment she saw Grace standing in the doorway, everything changed. Emily dropped the toy stethoscope she had been clutching and ran forward, her arms outstretched. Her voice broke the silence with the words William had longed to hear, "You came back." The sound carried through the hall, raw and desperate, but full of hope. Grace knelt down, opening her arms wide, and Emily collapsed into them, sobbing uncontrollably. William stood at the door, watching the scene, tears blurring his vision. For the first time in years, he felt the cold mansion warm again, filled not with silence or despair, but with the sound of his daughter reconnecting with the person who had saved her. William walked forward slowly, his steps heavy with emotion. He knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both Grace and Emily. The three of them clung to each other, their grief, guilt, and hope mixing into one embrace. Emily buried her face in Grace's chest, still whispering, "You came back," over and over, as if afraid she might disappear again. Grace held her tightly, stroking her hair and whispering soothing words, promising she was not going anywhere. William felt the weight of years lift off his shoulders as he pressed his forehead against his daughter's, his tears falling freely. For so long, he had been surrounded by power, money, and influence, but in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that his daughter was not alone anymore. Grace had returned, cleared of lies, stronger than before, and Emily had found her lifeline again. The cold, empty mansion now felt like a home. For the first time, William allowed himself to believe that they were not broken anymore. The family he thought he had lost was whole again. In the months that followed the trial, William and Grace worked tirelessly to transform their pain into something greater. Together, they launched the Carter Foundation for Ethical Pediatric Care, an organization dedicated to exposing corruption in medical practices and ensuring that children received accurate diagnoses and compassionate treatment. The mansion, which had once been filled with cold silence and despair, became the headquarters for meetings, planning sessions, and visits from families who had experienced the same kind of suffering. Grace took an active role, using her experience and her calm understanding of children to guide the mission. William provided resources and influence, opening doors that had been closed to others for years. Emily, meanwhile, grew stronger day by day. She began to laugh again, a sound that filled the house like a miracle. Therapists adjusted their methods, now guided by the truth about her sensory processing disorder, and for the first time, progress was visible. She no longer spent her days hiding or crying. Instead, she explored the mansion freely, sometimes sitting in the study drawing with crayons, sometimes following Grace as she worked. Life that had once seemed impossible now filled every corner of their home. The foundation quickly gained attention. Families reached out from across the country, desperate to share their own stories and eager to support the cause. William and Grace held meetings with doctors who wanted to reform the system, creating new guidelines for ethical pediatric care. The news reported regularly on their work, this time celebrating their efforts instead of scandalizing them. Grace, once the target of Veronica's lies, was now praised for her bravery and compassion. Still, she remained humble, focusing only on the children who needed help. Emily became the heart of the foundation's message. Her story was shared at conferences and in interviews, always with William and Grace careful to protect her privacy, while showing how important accurate diagnoses could be. Every success of the foundation was tied to the memory of the years they had lost, years that Emily had suffered unnecessarily. But now, those years carried meaning, because they had led to a mission that could save others. Slowly, the shadow that had once covered their lives lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose and unity. For the first time, William felt that his fortune was being used not for power, but for healing. At home, the changes in Emily were even more striking. Without the weight of a misdiagnosis, she was finally free to grow at her own pace. Grace worked with her daily, creating environments where Emily could feel safe and explore without fear. Simple activities like building puzzles or listening to soft music became stepping stones toward confidence. She learned to communicate more clearly, using words instead of screams to express her needs. The meltdowns that had once defined her days became less frequent, shorter, and less intense. William watched in awe as his daughter smiled more often, her face brighter with every week that passed. He had dreamed of these moments for years, but seeing them unfold before him felt unreal. The mansion itself reflected the change. Rooms once dark and quiet were now filled with light and sound. Emily's laughter, Grace's calm voice, and William's steady presence. Visitors who came for meetings often remarked on the warmth of the house, surprised to find such life in a place once associated with tragedy. For William, the transformation was proof that love, truth, and patience could rebuild even the most broken family. Months later, the foundation planned a major fundraising gala, the first of its kind. The event was held in a grand hall, filled with supporters, families, and donors who wanted to see change in pediatric care. William and Grace greeted guests warmly, but the true focus of the night was Emily. She had grown stronger and more confident, and Grace believed she was ready for something extraordinary. When the time came, Emily walked onto the stage, her small hands gripping the toy stethoscope she always carried. The crowd grew silent, watching her with anticipation. She stood nervously at first, shifting her feet, her eyes searching for Grace in the front row. Grace gave her a reassuring nod, and William clasped his hands tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily lifted the stethoscope, holding it close, and then she spoke into the microphone. Her voice was soft but steady, each word carrying weight beyond her years. The room held its breath as the little girl who had once lived in silence prepared to share her truth. With a shy smile, Emily said clearly, "This is my mommy. She healed me." The words echoed across the hall, and for a moment there was only silence. Then the crowd erupted in applause, tears streaming down faces as people rose to their feet. The sound of clapping, cheering, and crying filled the space, but all William could hear were the words of his daughter replaying in his mind. His vision blurred as tears filled his eyes, his body shaking with emotions too strong to contain. Grace covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by the moment, while Emily clutched her stethoscope proudly, unaware of how deeply her words had moved everyone present. Reporters captured the scene, but to William, it was not about publicity. It was about a child who had found her voice, about years of silence breaking into something beautiful. Emily smiled wider as she looked at Grace, then at William, knowing she was safe, loved, and heard. The gala had been meant to raise money, but in truth, it raised something greater: hope. William wept openly, no longer the untouchable businessman, but a father overwhelmed with pride and gratitude. He stepped onto the stage, pulling both Grace and Emily into his arms as the audience continued to applaud. In that embrace, everything else faded away. The scandals, the court battles, the sleepless nights, all of it no longer mattered. What mattered was that his daughter had spoken, that she had claimed Grace as her mother, and that they stood together as a family. For years, silence had defined their lives, crushing them under its weight. Now, trust and love had replaced it, giving Emily the strength to grow, and giving William and Grace the strength to protect her. The Carter Foundation would continue to fight for children, but in that moment, William only cared about the two people in his arms. Emily had found her voice, and with it, their family's future was secured. The hall roared with applause, but in William's heart, the only sound that mattered was his daughter's voice, clear and strong, proving that they had finally won their battle against silence. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.